Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bywire Interviews. Today, I am exceptionally pleased to be joined by a very special guest for an exclusive interview. I am joined today by the creator and founder of Fractally, EOS.io, Steemit, and BitShares. Now, there is one more project to add to this list, which we will discuss today, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So I would like to welcome Mr. Dan Larimer. Dan, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for doing this.
It's just our pleasure, Dan. Thank you so much for giving up your time. We'd love to have you here. Okay, so we've got loads and loads and loads to get into, so I'm going to jump right in if that's okay. So Dan, do you think it's fair to say that you enjoy building startups, being part of that startup journey, much more than you would, say, running a multinational corporation?
Absolutely. I like working with developers and whiteboarding ideas and building things and operate in a very fast environment. I really did not enjoy being CTO of a company with 150, 200 employees, where you have too many layers of management and other things between me and the developers. So like my favorite part of the day is I would just go from team to team working on the low level, and I would upset all the middle managers because, like, you're talking directly to the engineers, you didn't go through me. I'm like, I can't go through you. It's like pulling on a string, right? So yes, I'm much more attuned to working in small teams and where we can innovate rapidly, and we don't have a lot of communication, organizational process overhead. I'm not a manager of sorts that can keep to-do lists and lots of meetings and agendas and keep all those things. So it's, once it gets beyond a certain scale, it's not my wheelhouse anymore.
You may not care to admit it, but you are a classic entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs despise big corporations. If we wanted to work at a big corporation, we could go and work there. When we accidentally create them, then we want to kind of go off and do our own thing. I think 70 people is the limit before our minds just sort of fogging over and we start to lose interest. So just before we go on to talk about Sybase, which is your new project, I just want to briefly go over just a couple of points on Fractally, and I know we've discussed it already. Could you describe to me how the uptake on Fractally has been since the launch? Now, I know you mentioned earlier that the community just decided to throw the weekly meetings themselves. I didn't actually know that. So how is the kind of the beta launch or the beta kind of development been going?
Well, Fractally is making really good progress. We built an amazing decentralized interface that does all the video conferences and does things that helps people rank their contributions. And we did some tests with the community with the interface, and we've been making a lot of progress. So we've got, I'd say the process was enjoyable. A lot of people were doing a lot of things. It was really good. We have hit a roadblock with the entire Fractally process, not from a technological or thing, but more from a regulatory situation that has caused us to step back and say, well, who's going to actually be liable and responsible to the Department of Justice and the half dozen three-letter agencies out there when a decentralized organization, an unincorporated association, is engaged in things like creating tokens, transferring tokens, and or DeFi. As you know, the Fractally white paper outlines creating many tokens with automated liquidity between them, which now I have a legal theory, which I think is sound, right? Which is, this is not property. These are not property rights. You're not transferring assets. You're not creating contracts, right? Your tokens are not yours. They're community consensus. It's more like a reputation system. It's more like a credit score, where a transferable credit score where my credit goes down, but when I decide to boost yours up, But despite whatever legal wording I try to put into we're a nonprofit association, all this stuff. Like, we were doing a lot of work on that. And I think I had a really solid thing that threads the needle and avoids all the regulations in the spirit of freedom of association, freedom of speech, and full disclosure to everyone involved. Versus, I guess, a lot of DAOs and DACs before, where there's no organizational document, there's no contract that's binding, and so the courts can kind of just throw whatever they want at you and interpret however they want. But we're going down this path, and I thought it was a pretty good path. But what's changed this year as it's become very clear that we live in a rule of man society, not a rule of law society. We've got show trials with Alex Jones. We've got all the trumped up stuff against Trump, right? FBI raids and everything else. And now we got the Department of Justice going after DAOs, right? They went after the founders and developers first, got a settlement out of them, and then now they're going after the DAO itself. And then you've got executive orders coming out of Biden asking for recommendations and other things, so how to regulate cryptocurrency, right? And they're willing to do anything by executive order these days. And the initial feedback came back and says, well, we need the statute of limitations to go 10 years back. And so the rules of the game are not, hey, let's get a bunch of lawyers, let's figure out how to do this legally, and let's keep everyone out of trouble. That's not the game. If you are successful and you build a large community that's doing all these things, and you're a threat to the system, they will make up whatever they need to make up. They will charge you with whatever they need to charge you with. And it doesn't matter what the law is. It doesn't matter what your arguments are. They will shut it down. And so if you create a system of governance where you're involving hundreds or thousands of people to operate software that could be doing these tokens, it's putting targets on people, myself included, but everyone involved with the DAO is a potential target these days, which is a real shame to me, because on the one hand, I'm like, you know what, screw it, do it anyway, make them charge us, we'll fight them in the courts, we'll do all these things. So I still believe in the fractally process. I think the experiment has been fantastic and the incentives are aligned, and I think it's the best governance process for a blockchain out there, where the block producers are selected in this manner. But the environment that we're in has caused us to put on hold plans for a token to govern this thing. And since the entire incentive model around fractally was these tokens, it's caused us to go back to the drawing board of, well, what can we do from a decentralized reputation perspective, and governance perspective without a token? It's kind of similar to what happened with Voice. We couldn't get regulatory approval, and the token couldn't be transferable and all these other things, and it kind of just collapsed. And I think that's the single biggest challenge these days is you can have the right system, but if the powers that be decide that participating in that system, sanctioning the system, declaring it to be whatever they want it to be, and then amplifying the fines they levy against participants, that's just a very dangerous situation to put people in, especially when fractal governance is completely transparent. Everyone's on camera. They know exactly who's involved and who to go after, versus some of these other chains where it's a little bit more ambiguous. So that's the biggest challenge, is how do we do this in a safe way for people? And there's various ideas, but yeah, I'd say fractally, as it's operated in the past 9 months, completely manual, was incredibly successful and fun. We built a lot of great relationships, met a lot of great people.
Well, that's half the battle, really, isn't it? Making something like this fun. And I know a lot of people have described the whole kind of weekly meetings as really enjoyable and a great way to network. In fact, in my opinion, probably inspired Jesse Jaffrey to come up with the Eden networking event, which is the kind of way to add some value to Eden, which is not a bad way if you can't do governance. So does that mean then, back to Fractally, does that mean the respect token is binned because of the regulators, or is it on hold for now?
It's on indefinite hold. I don't have there's a number of things that I need to see from, living in the United States that I would need to see before I would feel comfortable. I would need to see integrity coming out of Congress with clear regulations, stopping the idea of regulating by enforcement, where you don't know whether or not you've broken the law until they decide to enforce something against you. That is untenable, particularly with 10-year statute of limitations and a general ambiguity about whether or not they're going to grandfather things in, right? So it's not just what's against the law today or what they don't like today. It's what might they not like anytime in the next 10 years, right? Well, gosh, they've declared crypto a threat. So if you're successful, you're going to be a threat. And if you're not successful, why bother? Either way, you have to assume you're going to be successful. You have to assume you're going to be a threat. And is that the battle you want to fight? So I think where we're at now is educating people on the virtues of fractal governance, on the virtues of a true democracy and the principles in more eco animals on one side, and on the other side, building better technology that is neutral from a token economics perspective. It's just better technology. And that's where we have Sybase, which Sybase is the analog to Antelope. It's the blockchain software that can be used to power many different blockchains, one of which would have been the blockchain that Fractally would have run on and run by the community.
Well, you stole my transition then, but you did it better than I ever would. So well done. So Sybase, the phenomenal new project from Mr. Dan Larimer. So let's jump into Sybase now. Let's go for it. So when I was doing a bit of research about the name Sybase, not least so I could pronounce it without looking like a fool, I looked into it and I found out that Sybase in biology is, I believe, commonly known as a database and file server for protein structural information, I believe, which is calculated by a SciMap algorithm. So I just wondered, given your Fibonacci and your Fractally or your fractal kind of hooks, if you like, is Sybase a nod to biology, or is it just a coincidence?
Oh, there's a lot of things that sci like. It's psyche, it's sci-fi, right? It's the super golden ratio, right? Golden ratio phi is what we're using for Fractally. So it's fun. Like we weren't going to have DeFi, we were going to have sci-fi. There's.
You gotta have sci-fi. That's brilliant. I love that.
So also we've got a new database structure designed from the ground up for blockchain. I provided some preview benchmarks that I did that show that it's faster than the chain base that powers EOS.
So to interrupt, you actually said it was faster and more scalable than Antelope IO. Can you speak to that?
I'm talking in particular the database itself, not necessarily the whole blockchain architecture, but having a database that can operate very well in memory and then scale beyond memory, and that can easily handle the forks of the blockchain. That is the challenge. And what a lot of blockchains do is they take an existing database stack, and then they build a blockchain on top of it. And then as the blockchain's forking and reorganizing and doing things blockchains do, they're trying to make the underlying database keep up and do that. And that's not the usage pattern that's friendly for the transactional model of traditional database. And that creates a lot of friction in performance performance hindrance. So EOS keeps everything in RAM, and so it's not as big of a problem. But once you get out of RAM, performance craters, right? And you trash your SSD drives with lots of unnecessary wear and tear. And so I set out to build a new database structure that could easily handle all the different versions, that could support parallel reads. So one of the challenges with EOS is you got the database in memory, but you can't read it while you're writing to it. So if you got transactions coming through at a high rate, you're always writing to it, which means you can't be doing queries against it. So now we have this whole challenging infrastructure. How do I replicate this database state in RAM to another database that I can actually run queries against while that's going on? Well, with the database inside of Sybase, the Sybase is like a blockchain with a database. And the database inside, we call it Trident, TRIEENT. That's just the library name. Trident looks like the Psi symbol. And TRIE is a data structure, which is a persistent trie is what the underlying structure of the database is, which gives us a generic key value system. And we'll get kind of detailed in here, but why Sybase? Well, we got all these fun things. And the other thing is a database is typically 3 disks, right? That's the symbol for a database. So the logo for Sybase is a Psi symbol on its side. And so it's kind of like a database and a blockchain combined. And the goal of Sybase is to create a better application framework for building web applications that brings blockchain into the mix and actually allows better performance and a better development experience. Traditional web applications, they've got a database server, and then they've got some code that's providing the front end, right? Your Node.js. It's serving web pages and then updating the database. And that's 2 processes, and one's doing all the authentication, and it's a nightmare to maintain and keep synchronized. And now, how do you throw a blockchain in the mix of that? Now you got the blockchain, the front end, and the database, and just all these different parts. You have to be a network admin expert in order to deploy the infrastructure of a modern web service. So I wanted to make it really simple. You have one database, and the smart contracts are just not contracts, they're more like services. They're like your Node.js or your application logic and your database come together, and they run in a deterministic fashion. And you don't need any other infrastructure in order to build your web application. You just run a Sybase node, and you can deploy your code, and then your users get all the security of blockchain and easy development experience. So that's some of the background of why Sybase, and what's different about it compared to things. So I could probably share my screen here and show a couple of things about it. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
All right. So Sybase is a database / web application toolkit. You can build a token-based system on it. We have a smart contract for tokens on it, and you can use fractal governance to govern the chain and all these other things. But we're trying to figure out the best way to handle resources in a decentralized public network without a token. So just like I said with fractally, we want to kind of stay away from tokens. originally the goal of Sybase is we'd have a blockchain that's governed with a fractal process that uses this token. The token buys the resources, and it's all the grand unification of everything. But given the regulatory framework, I haven't figured out the right approach there. So for now, Sybase is a toolkit that people can use to do that if they want to take those risks. But from my perspective right now, it's a better application framework for building web applications. So this website here is you can go to sybase.io. Can you see this right here?
Yep, that's looking great. Yeah, so I can see we've got accounts, Block Explorer, and About, which is available.
Right.
Wallet and Sybase is looking disabled to me.
Correct, because I'm not logged in.
Okay.
And I'm not going to be able to log in here because I don't have the keys here. But what you're seeing here is this entire website is hosted from Sybase.
Well, directly on chain.
Directly on chain. In fact, the smart contracts can respond to HTTP requests.
So even the HTML is all on chain.
Yes, HTML, the UI is all on chain, and
it loads fast and it's performant. I mean, yeah. It is performant. That's crazy. I'm just surprised that the whole thing is on chain. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the whole thing's on chain because the database can handle all the queries in parallel. You can have a server that's got lots of cores, and you can serve a lot of web requests off of a really, really fast database. And you can write your applications using any WebAssembly compatible language. Right now we support C++ and Rust, but you can also use assembly script in the future. So I think WebAssembly is just going to get more and more adopted with better and better tools. So you can build your backend with WebAssembly, powered smart contracts, which you call services, and you host your front end from the blockchain itself. In fact, with Sybase and Sybase, which is currently Sybase is kind of like MySpace for the blockchain. You can literally drag and drop files from your desktop and upload them and have a website on your account. So you can.
Holy cow! That sounds great. Wow.
Yes, you can deploy a website to Sybase without having to have any programming skills, so every account on Sybase has a subdomain. So when I go to About, you get about.sybase.io. About is the account name, right? So the account About has uploaded this content and hosted this page from that account. And
so is the About, would say Bywire deploy, just for argument's sake, on Sybase, would the about.bywire, would that be our user?
If your account is Bywire, bywire.sybase.io would be your website.
Ah, okay, gotcha. Very cool. In the future, would you be able to have masked domains, so you could just have your own domain without the .sybase extension?
You can host any root domain you like.
Ah, wow.
So the idea is, like Steam, you can have many top-level domains. Sybase.io is one, but you could have, different block explorers or out there that are top level. So each the users would decide what top-level domain they want, and then they can use all the applications on the blockchain because the top-level domain would have the subdomains for every other website. In fact, you could host your own full node, synchronize with the blockchain. Other people deploying their apps, you use their apps through your domain.
I don't even know if I could fathom that. That's like insane. So talk me through that again, as if I'm 5, which is basically my mental psyche anyway. So you're saying I can use any other.
Let me step back and say, what's the single biggest problem with blockchain today? The blockchain's out there, and in theory, it's decentralized. But if you want to use NFTs on Ethereum, you have to go to 1 or 2 domains that control the interface for that. If those domains are down, it doesn't matter if you got your keys. you don't have a practical way of using those interfaces, right? The user interface is the contract. And then you have all kinds of security problems where I think I'm visiting this domain. It's asking me to sign this transaction. Do I trust the domain? Do I trust the transaction? It's a black box. You sign and you hope it's not transferring your tokens at the same time, right? So what is the official audited code base? Well, one of the problems that Block One had, even during the token distribution, is someone hacked our server and swapped out the Ethereum address for like a minute. Right? Then we caught it, and fortunately, it didn't look like any serious funds were lost. But you're relying on the security of the server to host the interface, and any of those servers get hacked, all the users of the server, right? But with Sybase, the application is on chain. You have to hack the blockchain to hack the server that's hosting the website for you.
So no more phishing.
No more phishing.
Wow.
Right.
Phenomenal. Honestly, that is incredible. And will that scale like 1 million users?
Well, if all the users want to run a full node, yeah, they could have their own personal dedicated interface that they trust entirely, or you can go to a service provider that's going to host it. The block producers could be paid by the network to provide the infrastructure for all the UIs. So now, if you build a DeFi application, you can build it, you can deploy it, and it'll be hosted, and you don't have to host any infrastructure yourself. Right?
Wow. That's super cool and super secure and super scalable as well.
It's a scalable, and this is made possible because Trident can scale beyond RAM.
How will the accounts work?
Well, accounts, accounts is an app here, right? Account sys. And this is actually an applet. So what you're seeing here is there's a top menu bar, which I guess we probably should have made it a different color, but this top menu bar is one domain, right? We call that the common root domain. And then below here is another iframe, which contains the app. And this app right here allows us to list a lot of the different accounts that are deployed on the chain. And if I was logged in, I could create another account, or I can import a key. When I import a key, it's managed by the root domain. So all the apps don't have access to keys, but the user interface is hosted from a subdomain, which can request transactions be signed that are going to that subdomain, to the smart contracts associated with it. So we don't have the anchor problem of, here, pop up a dialog and approve it. If your user interface is interfacing with your smart contract, it just works.
How are the communications handled? I assume there's no more API layer?
The API is in browser. So the iframe here talks to the iframe at the top and says, here's a JSON blob, please sign and submit the transaction. The top level manages all the keys, signs and submits the transaction, does all the authentication. Now, the really cool thing is we can have app-to-app communication entirely in the browser. So I can have my token interface and my exchange interface, two different apps produced by two different people. And they can ask the browser to say, hey, browser, ask this other app to do something for me. And it can pop up dialogues and things like that. So it's like an operating system in your browser managing all the different UI apps. And when you get an account, you're deploying an app to the blockchain. And you can have application groups that trust each other. And you can have permissions where the token app inside your browser can have spending limits of other accounts that you configure. Your spending limits are not published on the blockchain. When any other app wants to do a transfer, it asks your front-end token app on your browser, is this authorized? And if it is, then it will sign and send it. All the enforcement's happening in the browser. Nothing has to go to chain. So now you don't just have consensus on the blockchain side, you have some consensus inside your browser where all the different apps that you use can talk to each other. You can have an address book with all your friends that you only disclose to the token app. You don't have to publish your friend list to the blockchain. You can just manage it there. And then all the other apps that want to leverage your friend list can do so just by app-to-app communication within the browser, and it is secure.
Could that work for messaging as well? Could that replace like email and instant messaging? Person to person rather than third party.
If you use things like WebRTC and things like that. But this is more like all the files on all the apps on your computer, they can talk to each other, right? They all have access to your computer. No one else on the internet can see that. They can see your same file system. This is the same kind of thing. Oh, you'd like to access the camera? All right, we'll give you permission. You don't have to tell someone in the cloud that you're granting permission to use the camera. You just do it all locally. So you have all these local permissions that can be managed that allow sharing of your information. So your account with the token app can coordinate with your account in the exchange app. And these are all just your accounts to your account communication between different apps with different levels of permission. But it allows to create a user experience that is as native and intuitive and free from all these dialogues asking you to sign things, because the contract is the user interface. And everyone's getting the same user interface to interact with the smart contract, right? And this is just scratching the surface of what can be done. But this is a fundamentally game-changing infrastructure. People have said it's the most Web3 thing out there of all the different Web3 things that exist. Because
that's the understatement of the year. I mean, it is the most Web thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, so let's get back to the root of the issue. When Bitcoin came out, it was originally, I can stop sharing my screen here. Right. When Bitcoin came out, it was originally an app that everyone downloaded, and it had an interface for doing the transfers. Everyone got their interface from the app running on their computer, and so everyone could trust it because it was verified. That is why it was trustworthy. Then as Bitcoin got bigger and bigger and bigger, people started moving to light wallets, and they started using different wallets. And then eventually they moved to web wallets, where it's hosted on websites in the cloud. And that's somewhat possible with Bitcoin because, well, the app is very simple. It's always just token transfers. Right? How many different ways can you represent it? Lots of different people can represent a token transfer, but you're trusting the app to faithfully represent the transaction you're signing and to faithfully synchronize with what's going on the blockchain itself. But then Ethereum comes along and introduced smart contracts, and now you've got an infinite number of apps. And not every wallet can provide an interface for every single app, right? So now you've got a whole bunch of wallets or interfaces, each offering a subset of the functionality. Maybe some of them share transfer functionality, but now if you want to use one app and then another app, you have to, do I trust all these apps with my keys? No, you don't want to trust them all with your keys. So you have a dedicated app that you trust with your keys, but that doesn't really solve your problem because what are you signing? There's other apps have to request the key manager to sign something for you. And how does the key manager communicate to you what it is that you're authorizing? All it can say is, this domain asks you to sign this hash, right? And maybe if there's a token transfer in it, you can detect it, but in reality, you can't. You're calling some function in some smart contract with an opaque payload. If you don't trust the interface that proposed it, they might not get access to your key, but they have the ability to ask you to sign anything. And so most people just say, okay, okay, okay. And that causes problems because people default into yes, and then they accidentally go to the wrong domain, like typo, and they say, okay, and oops, their funds are gone. That is the problem with MetaMask and all the other things. That's the problem that Anchor has. EOS, I tried to solve this with Ricardian contracts, right? Where the wallet has at least some kind of template where you can explain to the user what's going on. but a lot of developers didn't use them. And even with the recording contracts, it's still opaque. The reality is the user interface is what the user is trusting. And if you can't trust the user interface, then you have no idea what's being signed. So now you have a bad user experience where I want to do anything and I like an app's pop up on my phone. I got to sign it and I have to do that with every time I transact, or I got to trust my key, which means I'm exposing my funds, and it just gets really messy. Sybase solves all of those problems because the interface is hosted on chain, which means it can have reputation, it can be bonded, and it can't be phished. And that is huge.
That's a revolution, I would say. I mean, it's one of the biggest innovations I think I've ever heard in Web3. I think the biggest pain point that's stopping this expansion is the security element, is the fact that, you know, to integrate with a, to even speak to a website, I need my phone, and I have to do Face ID. I have to, like you said, trust that the pop-up is okay. Have I read the details of every single pop-up that's ever come up that I've messaged? Probably not. You know, I do, you know, trust certain websites, and then I go quickly. So I can really see this problem. And obviously, you know, over $1 billion was stolen in crypto last year alone. So it's a huge problem. You spoke a little bit about this, but you didn't really go into much detail. So I kind of want to know a little bit more about how the Byzantine consensus mechanism actually works. So could you speak to us a little bit about that?
Well, Sybase is designed to have two different systems. One is based off of Raft. It's not Byzantine fault tolerant. It's redundant. It's a situation where you've got a business, and you've got servers in different data centers with automatic failover. That can be an advantage because it's faster, lower latency to reach consensus. And in this situation, your security comes from the fact that blockchain's public, and you're getting the private keys, and you're getting all this other infrastructure advantage. Byzantine fault tolerance comes in when you have adversaries, where any one node might be an attacker. And so we would support that, and that would use a similar process to all the other Byzantine fault tolerant things, where you have multiple rounds, right? You propose, and then everyone acts it, and then they act the acts kind of thing. So there's there's details of that process that are not implemented. We don't have Byzantine fault tolerant implemented at this time. It's designed in the roadmap. We've got Raft implemented at this time, which is enough to create all the private blockchains you'd ever want to operate. BFT would be necessary for public blockchains. But in addition, public blockchains need a governance model and a token for incentivizing and to handle resources. So we got an amazing resource model as well. But yeah, so we're working toward the BFT side. But for now, Sybase is currently targeted toward private chains or enterprises that want to run a blockchain, build applications. And I believe, WordPress is powerful because you have all these different plugins that you can plug in and integrate with, and you can just go build a website and go. Well, this could be the next generation of WordPress, if you will, where the plugins can operate like smart contracts, collaborating on the back end. They can interact securely. They can share database stuff, and you got all these really good firewalls, and users are using private keys. So if you view this as a blockchain-based, better alternative to a WordPress backend, database, and so on, it's a better plugin architecture that allows plugins on the front end and the back end, which is huge, and integrations between different services that would not be possible on a WordPress type system today. So that's what the Raft system is geared toward. And the Byzantine fault tolerant system was what we were going to have done, similar to how EOS is adding BFT for faster finality. It would be very similar to that approach, is what we would be doing for Sybase. And then, of course, BFT is assuming you've got a set of producers or infrastructure providers. It just makes sure that how they reach consensus. But the question is, how do you decide who the infrastructure providers are, who's going to be in the BFT set. And that's where fractal governance and fractally make sure that that BFT group is decentralized instead of, say, you could implement DPoS like EOS and select it like EOS does, but we see how that creates cartels. Even if you have a BFT at the top, it's still token centralized because of Pareto distributions. So the full grand vision of, if we lived in a world where there is actually freedom, you'd use fractal governance, people meeting weekly, contributing to select the best contributors, right? The biggest contributors to the public good are the ones that are deciding who the block producers are. The block producers would have to provide all this infrastructure, each one with a root domain, hosting the entire interface, combined with IPFS for static large content. And then you'd have the decentralized governance holding them accountable to those standards. And the infrastructure providers are not governing the blockchain. They're just service providers hired by the governance process. And then you use the token to buy the resources, but the token has no power over governance. So you would burn tokens for CPU, network, and storage. And that would be the grand vision of what I would like to see in a world where the regulators are not breathing down the neck of anyone who tries to do anything that could actually threaten the system.
I mean, yeah, that's really the most exciting thing I've ever heard, really. I mean, WordPress powers, I think, 1/3 of the internet. So, I mean, if we could move into the world where we could have Web3, ubiquitously throughout the internet, that would be the situation. And it looks like you have created the infrastructure and the foundations for that. And that is hugely exciting, really is. So will Sybase facilitate fractally then? Those two things have to kind of work together, right?
Yeah, Sybase is the operating system. A operational blockchain like EOS would be the hardware the operating system is running on. And Fractally is the Microsoft Office. It's the killer application that sits on top of it. So
Sybase could work in theory with Antelope then?
No.
It couldn't.
Sybase is an alternative to Antelope.
Okay, so there's no way that the Antelope infrastructure could borrow anything from Sybase or anything like that. It couldn't run
there's elements of code that could be reused. The Trident library for our database could be moved over there. We have various smart contracts. If EOS implemented synchronous calls, one of the biggest things we have is smart contracts can call each other synchronously and get results. Similar to how Ethereum works, different from how EOS works. The entire system is more flexible than the smart contract system because all the accounts are defined in WebAssembly. Even the definition of a transaction is defined by WebAssembly. So we've got a reduced instruction set, if you will, model, a risk model versus EOS is a CISC, a complex instruction set. The permission system is more robust and completely programmable compared to the, EOS has a really flexible permission system, but it's kind of like fixed, not programmable. This is a programmable permission system over here. So there are ideas from Sybase that EOS could adopt, but because some of them are very, very fundamental, like the structure of a transaction is determined by a smart contract, whereas on EOS, the transaction is determined outside of smart contract land, which means it's a hard fork to change. And we could completely change the serialization of a transaction without a hard fork on Sybase, which is just incredibly powerful. So we designed it to be the most flexible, self-upgrading system possible, with basically a very simple set of intrinsics for accessing the database and calling other contracts. So
that sounds great. So what is native automated liquidity standard? What is a native automated liquidity standard, which I know Sybase has introduced?
It's Bancor relays. It's just what we talked about in the Fractally white paper with mutual respect and everything else. So that would be like an app or a standard library that could be provided that was planned.
So what's the roadmap for Sybase then, and Sybase and all this fun stuff? When can Bywire start building cool apps on Sybase? What's the roadmap?
Well, Sybase is available for anyone to download right now and start building local apps. We're going to continue to develop Sybase to be a really robust framework, application framework, where our original plan was to be able to have a public blockchain launch by February, but without a token involved. That won't be achievable, but I think we'll have a stable version that could be deployed on, apps could be built on in February timeframe. It's relatively stable even right now, but the APIs and things are constantly enhancing, but the code itself runs well and doesn't crash.
Wow. Okay, super cool. We might have to download that and start having some fun with that. So I think it was January this year, you mentioned that you had lined up investors to kind of give you some resources to build this. So I wondered, and you mentioned they weren't B1 or Helios or ENF. So I just wondered, did you manage to raise investment for this, or did you bootstrap the project yourself?
So far, I've funded this almost all myself. There's one other investor that came in for a small amount, but the overall, I was holding off on investment until I had regulatory clarity on the business model of how the token was going to work. So at the moment, we've not taken any money from any other sources other than basically other than people that are on the team.
So with no token, how are you going to plan to kind of grow this ecosystem, and how do you plan to kind of incentivize projects to join Sybase?
Well, you like to ask tough questions. Well, right now, Sybase is an open source project being built for the love of open source code, and it's free to use. So why adopt it? Because it's better code. It's better software that can help you build your decentralized application faster. We're not offering tokens or economic incentive to build on the platform. And if no one wants to build on the platform, no one wants to build on the platform. But, Sybase was built by the best developers who built EOS.io, which is now Antelope. And Antelope is widely recognized as one of the best architectures out there. And Sybase is the next thing, right? This is, fixes all the problems that the developers learned from EOS.io and gets it right. And if you want EOS.io and Antelope without the problems that people are used to, Sybase is where you go. If you want to build a new blockchain, you have a choice. You can adopt Antelope, and they've got all their funding and everything. So that's one thing. Or you can adopt Sybase and get all the benefits of a more modern, faster, easier to develop for, more secure. The list goes on and on and on of all the ways it's an improvement on a technological level over every other blockchain project I've seen. I'd say that there's one thing, like there's a sweet spot where Sybase makes sense. There's one other project that allows you to host your interface directly from the blockchain, and that's the Internet Computer. But the Internet Computer is, I think, more complicated to develop for. It's a massive project, but it's got centralized governance over the whole thing. So it's not really practical for a business to run their own personal internet computer. And I'm sure, just read the documentation. Anyone can do it, right? But it's really designed around this idea. You got multiple data centers, lots of redundancy, blah, 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 blah. Like it's big time infrastructure. But if you just want to have a simple server that's using blockchain that you can just run yourself, run a node and go, right? This is the blockchain for small businesses, for people that want to run their apps and have some control over their infrastructure at a more modest scale. It actually allows things to be decentralized. Performance-wise, we've done some initial benchmarks. We haven't really been optimizing for performance right now, but in terms of like sustained transfers per second, we're 350 or so currently, and we're not even pegging the CPU. And that's just early numbers. And that, let's say like EOS, it's topped out at 4,000, but practically it's around 1,000. The reality is no blockchain that is doing tightly coupled sequential actions is going anywhere near 350 transactions per second. By the time you're doing 350 transactions per second, sustained, your infrastructure requirements are already getting way out there. So the idea there is you have multiple Sybase chains and they do communication between them. And with good governance, that's more possible. But so there's that sweet spot, mid-sized blockchain that's not trying to go for thousands of transactions per second, which is going to centralize. It's going to require a level of expertise to run and operate. This is meant for people to do it yourself. Small communities can maintain and wrangle this without having to be an expert in network architecture. So it's really designed toward the small business entrepreneur versus big iron, expensive, $100,000 servers and all this other stuff. That's where Sybase is. It gives you the best possible Web3 at a scale that makes sense, and it's not trying to scale up to the point that you're a centralized target.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Really, really exciting. I think it's got the potential to really, completely rocket boost the Web3 sector, and I'm really excited to start playing around with it. So I'm going to let you go because we've done just nearly 3 hours of interview. I'll turn this into Dan Larimer, the feature film. It's been such a great interview. So I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been incredible. And I just want to leave on one final question. You tweeted, I think it was about a week ago, and it struck me. So I'm going to read the tweet back to you, and I'm going to ask you to describe what you meant by it and who it was directed at. But you wrote, and I think it's from the Bible, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So why did you tweet that, and what it's about, and who is it intended for? I tweeted it because I do believe that we are in a spiritual battle, that there are spiritual forces that are coordinating and moving in governments and in this mass psychosis and all this stuff. Because if you don't get the spirit, if you don't fix things at the spiritual level within the individuals, then you're going to have the corruption, right? So the solution is in individual spiritual awareness, right? Individuals coming back to God and repenting from all the desire for power to rule over other people, right? And I think that's this spiritual need to dominate that we have to overcome as individuals. And if we don't conquer that, then it doesn't matter what software we produce, it's going to fail. Because there's a coordinating thing, like why are all the masses falling in line? Why does everyone support tyranny? How does Hitler come to power? That is,
people are aligned at a level where they don't even understand why they're aligned or why their energies are moving in that direction. Yes, we have spiritual, it's a spiritual war. And if you're not willing to face that, you can't even begin to fight, right? You're boxing shadows. Yeah, technology is not going to solve a spiritual problem. That is the root of it. And technology is flesh and blood, right? It's the problem is up here, how we think and in our hearts. And so if we want to change the world, if we want to make a difference, then we've got to get to the heart thing, got to get past the arrogance that individuals have that they know how to run other people's lives better. The arrogance that technology is really just a means to power. Technology makes you as an individual more powerful. You can do more things. But that power, once captured, is turned around and used to suppress. So blockchain technology, which we think is going to liberate us, will actually end up enslaving us because we become dependent on the technology. So I put that tweet out there more to indicate the fact that I don't believe the solution's in technology. As someone who builds technology, that is a major leap. I don't think the solution is in fighting people physically. It's not about a revolution when you pick up guns and you go kill the bad guys. You have to fight things. It's a kind of an info war, to borrow from Alex Jones, but I don't think that's even enough because it's in the heart as well. People have to come from the right thing. So it's spiritual warfare, and the people at the highest levels are very, very dark. And that darkness is what aligns all of them. It's what allows them to have organic cooperation toward tyranny. And because that always puzzled me. It's like, how can all these people be on the same corrupt agenda, right? There's some kind of spirit flowing behind the agenda that causes everyone to fall in line. And so that's why I put that. And you're right, it's from the Bible. So I think it was, the Christians were being persecuted and Rome was coming after them. And people wanted to take up arms and fight off Rome and all that stuff. And Paul was saying, no, that's not the battle, right? You don't win by fighting in the physical domain. So that's the bigger challenge that we have to face.